And welcome to another edition of the Action Network Fantasy Flex podcast. I am your host, Chris Raybon, joined as always by Sean Kerner. And today we have a special guest returning to the show for a second time in, I think, as many weeks almost, Samantha Praviti of the Action Network. We're going to talk sleepers with her in just a second. Just want to remind you guys that this is the all new Fantasy Flex podcast feed. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Just search Fantasy Flex wherever you get your podcasts. Click that follow button or that subscribe button, whatever you need to do to get all this good stuff all season long. We'll be doing three episodes per week during the regular season. Samantha, what's going on?
Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me again.
No doubt. I heard you were doing some hiking.
Yeah, so much hiking. I love that that's become like part of my social media persona now because it's very funny. I'm like not a very outdoorsy person, but I'm leaning into it, trying to do more, trying to be less of a city person. I moved from New York, so the most hiking I was doing was like in Central Park or hiking from Target with like a bunch of bags.
Oh man, you gotta just Uber, man. Take the subway, something.
I'm that person where like the bags were breaking on the sidewalk. I'm having like a mental breakdown because my seltzer's everywhere and just another day in New York. So
yeah, I don't miss it. Sean, what's going on, man?
Not much. I haven't been hiking. Instead, I've been sweating preseason player props. So all good over here. Looking forward to seeing Trey Lance in person with you this Sunday. Oh, yeah. We will be attending the Chargers-Niners game. I'm hoping Lance will play about a half this week. I don't think we'll see Justin Herbert, unfortunately, but excited to see Trey Lance in person.
Yeah, I thought the rookie quarterbacks had pretty good, opening preseason debuts. So excited to see him play some more. And Herbert, yeah, I think he's already been ruled out. But we're gonna talk some sleepers in this episode. So for everybody listening, these are the guys that have upside that are not really thought of as fantasy starters, not really being drafted as fantasy starters, but the guys that, as you start to fill out your starting lineup, these guys can really give you an edge. Not all of them will hit. We already know that, but we're hoping that, enough of them can hit, and the ones that do hit give you a massive edge. So that's what we'll be talking about. And let's start it right off with quarterbacks. Samantha, who are some quarterbacks that are currently being drafted outside the top 12 that you like to finish perhaps in that top 12, top 10 by the time the season's over?
Yeah, of the guys currently consensus ranked on Fantasy Pros outside of the top 12, I think Matt Ryan has the clearest path to finish inside the top 12. He finished as QB 13 in 2020 through 16 weeks. Yes, he lost Julio Jones this offseason, but gained Kyle Pitts, who I am convinced Atlanta will utilize as a receiver and will be an awesome red zone target for Ryan. I also predict the team will be in a number of negative game scripts. Again, they gave up the most passing yards per game in the NFL last year, which will lend itself to a lot of passing attempts from Ryan. So I really like him, and I've seen him fall super, super late in a lot of drafts. He's just like become this weird, unsexy name, and I'm like, I'll take it, especially since I've been getting Kyle Pitts. So I kind of like that stack.
Oh yeah, that Matt Ryan. I mean, he's up and down. Like sometimes he is that unsexy guy, but then he'll just come out of nowhere like a QB4 finish or something. So he's an interesting one. Sean, how about you?
So I mean, Trey Lance probably isn't a sleeper anymore. But he's still being drafted in the QB 17 to 20 range. And I think he's a sleeper in the sense of, he's part of my league winning strategy. If I punt at quarterback, I usually take Trey Lance in the very later rounds with intention of stashing him, for the first several games. He's not going to kill you on your bench. Usually the first few weeks, it's very easy to stash guys on your bench. So once he does take over for starting quarterback, I mean, we already saw this. He has QB1 upside. I think, especially when it comes to the fantasy playoffs, he has the easiest schedule. They face the Falcons, Titans, and Texans. So I'm drafting him with the goal of winning my fantasy football league, and that should be yours too. Now, for 2 QB leagues, he does carry some risk because we don't really know when he's going to start. So in a 2 QB league or super flex format, I mean, you are inheriting some risk that he might not start a game at all this year. But if you're in one QB league, it makes so much sense to draft him super late and stash him on your bench and just stream quarterback in the meantime until he's ready to go, and then he'll be a QB1.
Yeah, they're going to have a Trey Lance package, even if he's not starting. So he might not give you straight up zeros, even if you're in like a best ball league or something. Mm-hmm. It could be like that Taysom Hill, where he's still out there for a few snaps here and there. So I like Trey Lance a lot. I also like Justin Fields for the same reasons. I think he starts sooner than later in Chicago. I know they're talking up Andy Dalton, but just look at Chicago and what they're going to face this year. I think The Athletic has them as facing the most top tier quarterbacks, or the toughest slate of quarterback schedule, which means they're going to be in some shootouts. And I just don't think you want to do that with Andy Dalton. I think Fields is going to take over. He's going to give you rushing upside. And that's really what you're looking for in this, outside this top 12. I mean, the top 10, I think, is pretty set. And then it starts to becomes a game of like, which pocket passer do you like, really? And then, with a few young guys mixed in there. So I really like Justin Fields. And then Joe Burrow is still going just outside the top 12 in most leagues, around number 13. I think he has a lot of upside. I know people are worried about the offensive line, but this is a team that's been near the top of the league in pass attempts every year. And I expect that to continue. So Joe Burrow got his college buddy, Jamar Chase. I mean, this could really be a, high volume season for Joe Burrow like it was last year. He'll be improved. I think efficiency wise, he won't have to throw to AJ Green, who he was just miserably inefficient to. There's no COVID, limiting the entire offseason for him, even though he is coming back off the injury. I still think he'll be a smarter quarterback. He'll have better feel. So I think he could really explode this year as well. And he gives you a little bit on the ground as well. So that's another guy that I think he could be in every week QB1 that you could still get outside that top 12. All right, let's move on to a little deeper here. Little maybe 2 QB action going on. You're in a best ball league. You need that second, maybe even that third quarterback. Samantha, who are you looking at way outside the top 20?
Yeah, way outside. This is almost like tinfoil hat stuff, but no. I like Jameis Winston at QB 31. He's currently the betting favorite to take the Saints first snap at minus 185 odds. That's approximately 65% probability. We've seen what Winston can do from a fantasy perspective. He finished as QB4 in 2019 in his last season as a starter in Tampa. He's got decent weapons in New Orleans, even without Michael Thomas for 8 weeks. I think he could definitely be a viable starter in 2 QB leagues and could absolutely finish inside the top 24.
Sean, how about you? Deep
QB. I'm going with the other Saints QB. I really think you can't go wrong with either as your QB3 in like a best ball or like a stash for later. But Taysom Hill already showed that he has QB1 upside last year in his 4 starts. He was a QB5. We love that rushing upside when it comes to fantasy football, and that's what he brings. It's a pretty volatile situation. Winston, I think, will get the week 1 start, but it's up in there after that. I mean, we know he's turnover prone and anything can happen. So Taysom Hill could benefit off that chaos. And also, without Michael Thomas, like they lack pass catching weapons. So I think like a guy like Taysom Hill might be needed to put some life in this offense. So I wouldn't be surprised if Taysom Hill starts sooner than later. So I love him as, a QB3 best ball kind of flyer because when he does start, which could happen this year, he has QB1 upside.
Over under 0.5 touchdown passes from Jameis Winston to Taysom Hill this year.
Oh, over. I'm taking over on that. Easy.
You going over too, Samantha?
Yes, definitely over.
And that's a good point. You kind of mentioned it with Trey Lance. Like, even if Taysom Hill's not starting, he won't get you zeros because he does get carries, touchdowns, those sorts of things. So that's why I like him. He has a higher floor for these, random QB3 flyers at the end, but he could also be starting before the year's over.
Yeah, I like Taysom. I think if I had to choose between Taysom and Jameis, I'd still go Taysom even with Jameis favorite to start, just because I don't know if Jameis can play the way he played to give you that upside. Like, I just don't think Sean Payton is going for that. I think if he starts to launch the ball all over the field and turn it over, I think Sean Payton's just going to go back to that, conservative, run heavy Taysom Hill option approach and kind of win games that way. They still have a pretty good roster outside of, the quarterback position and obviously the receivers are banged up. So I think it could actually benefit Taysom just from the way they kind of want to win and stay in games down the stretch, especially without Thomas. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, I like Taysom. I like Tyrod Taylor in Houston. He's another guy, not really sexy, but you just have to look at that rushing upside because so many quarterbacks are going to score within a couple of points of each other on a weekly basis. There's not going to be that much separation, but how you can get separation is if you get those, 6 points on the ground for a rushing score. You get, some of the yards that you would normally, most guys are getting passing, you're getting them on the ground. You're getting more points, obviously, in fantasy. So a guy like Tyrod Taylor is the presumed starter for the Houston Texans this year. Doesn't look like Deshaun Watson is going to be starting dealing with the legal issues. So, and he could be, traded obviously too. So I think Tyrod Taylor was an interesting dart throw. Does he start the whole year? Maybe, maybe not, but you only have Davis Mills behind him. I think they want to see a couple starts out of him, but I would still think, Tyrod Taylor has the kind of leg up here to start, 12, 13, 14 games for the Texans this year. So I like him. And of course, Zach Wilson, who I just think is just a talented rookie and could surprise people. He goes outside the top 20 in a bunch of drafts still. And I just think this Jets receiving core could be pretty good. It's pretty deep. And it's just a whole new team. There's a lot of uncertainty there. This guy's got a lot of arm talent. It could be a bad team. I mean, they have really nothing at the cornerback position. So they could get in some shootouts too, even though they have a defensive-minded head coach coming over in Robert Saleh. So like Zach Wilson, like Tyrod, like Taysom. For some QB deep sleepers, let's go on to the running back position. Samantha, who are some guys, before we get into like the deep guys, just somebody maybe in that, RB3, RB4 range that people who haven't been paying that much attention or just kind of getting back into things now should know about?
Yeah, I really like Gus Edwards, whose consensus ranked as RB40. He finished as RB35 through 16 weeks in half PPR last season, which with more competition in the Ravens backfield from Mark Ingram. He's one of the highest valued handcuffs, in my opinion, because he is one major injury away to J.K. Dobbins from having RB1 potential, but he also has that standalone value. He produced in that 3-man backfield last year, scored 6 touchdowns, and I think he'll finish higher than his current ADP of RB41.
Yeah, definitely. Gus Edwards is a guy who just gets slept on year after year, but the Ravens love him. And there's no Mark Ingram to take carries this year. Justice Hill, I think he'll be more of a special teams guy, not really get carries unless somebody else gets hurt. So it'll be a 2-man backfield this year, I think, for most of the year. So that's good news for Dobbins, but also for Gus Edwards. Sean, how about you? RB3, RB4 sleepers.
Yeah, I love the Gus Edwards pick, and I'm actually highlighting 4 backs in that range that had that similar kind of like high floor ceiling combo. I mean, let's be real. This is the range where their end of season value really does depend on their health and their teammates' health. So it's kind of unpredictable in that sense. But Zach Moss, AJ Dillon, Gus Edwards, Latavius Murray, those 4 backs in this range, they provide you a high floor where if you're in a pinch, you can start them in your flex if you have like injury issues or bye week issues. But they all possess RB1, RB2 upside if the starting running back or their running back by committee counterpiece get injured. So I love that profile they have. They give you a ton of versatility and they're cheap. They're all around the RB40 range. We have a guy like Tony Pollard who he kind of needs Zeke to get hurt to have value. So that's why I think these 4 backs are critical when it comes to like my running back draft strategy. I love them all where they're going.
Yeah, AJ Dillon is a guy that really stands out to me for kind of similar reasons as Gus Edwards. You look at that backfield in Green Bay, it's going to be a 2-man backfield. Jamal Williams was a guy who was getting anywhere from 35 to 45% of the snaps on a weekly basis. You never really saw Aaron Jones go like 80, 90% in terms of the backfield share. If, LaFleur could help it, assuming guys weren't hurt. And so I think Dillon now is in position to take over that entire Jamal Williams role, because you want to keep Aaron Jones fresh. For the Green Bay is set up to make a deep postseason run, and Aaron Jones is their guy. He's the guy that they kind of run their red zone offense through at this point, almost more so than Rodgers and Adams. So I think AJ Dillon is going to get a lot of work, and he's one injury away from being a straight up RB1. So I like him a lot. I'll also mention Michael Carter of the Jets. I know there'll be some other backs kind of work in there, Salas from that San Francisco, committee backfield, but Carter's already been running with the ones for the entirety of camp. He's easily the most talented guy in that backfield. He's good in the pass game, and he's good in the run game with his stop ability. So I think he separates himself from everybody else in that backfield, and I think his value is only going to increase as the season progresses. And you get a little discount on Carter compared to a guy like Javonte Williams, who is already kind of being drafted a little closer to his ceiling now, about 5-10 picks up in the running back range. So I like Michael Carter, like AJ Dillon quite a bit. Let's talk some deeper. Actually, no, let's pivot real quick, because every year we see it's at least one, sometimes it's multiple guys that are just PPR monsters. They kind of come out of nowhere. So I want to spend some time just talking about, like, who do we think that JD McKissic, 2020 JD McKissic is this year? Samantha, I'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know if this is an obvious pick, but I'm going to go with Nyheim Hines at RB 43. He was third in catches last season among running backs, and behind Alvin Kamara and JD McKissic. He caught 63 of 76 for 482 yards and 4 touchdowns, finished as RB 21 in half PPR and RB 16 in full PPR. I know it's looking like Carson Wentz is trending towards a week 1 return at this point, but it's not as though we thought this offense was going to be super pass friendly, no matter which Colts quarterback we saw, which I think might work to Hines' advantage. I could see a lot of conservative sort of short passes to him, and his workload staying the same year over year, and easily returning an investment at his ADP, which is currently RB 46 and half PPR.
Yeah, Nyheim Hines gets slept on every year. It looked like they were phasing him out. I think that for his rookie year, he didn't play much in the postseason, but he's come on strong these last couple of years, and his role looks pretty solidified now. So I like Nyheim Hines quite a bit. Sean, what about you? Who's your PPR sleeper for this year?
Well, this guy's not really a sleeper because he's kind of the poster child for a PPR kind of guy you draft, but he's still being slept on this year. James White is currently being drafted at RB 50 in PPR. Now, granted, last year he was playing with Cam Newton, so he was bit of a disappointment, but this year I think if Mac Jones were to take over, I think James White will benefit. No more Rex Burkhead, so I think he should dominate the pass catching work out of the backfield here. And then the one guy that I think could be a sleeper this year is Tom Brady's potentially new James White, and that's Giovanni Bernard, Fantasy Flex favorite. I think he's a sleeper in PPR because they don't really have that PPR type of back. But now they have Giovanni Bernard. So I think he could take over some of those snaps from Leonard Fournette. And then Ronald Jones basically is useless in the passing game. So I think Gio could handle most of that work. The only concern with him is the Buccaneers don't really provide a ton of trailing game scripts that Gio needs. So that's why I think his ceiling is a bit capped. But we've seen in the past, if Leo Fournette gets hurt or Ronald Jones gets hurt, he's more than capable of stepping in and, being more of a workhorse back. So I think he's a sleeper that I think, he's like RB 60 right now in PPR, far too low. If you're in a PPR format, you should stash him for his very high floor.
Yeah, I've kind of made up my mind that he is going to play the exact role that Dare Ogunbowale played. Like, I don't think Bruce Arians has come out and said that specifically, but if you just look at how he split up his backfield in the 2019 season, Ogunbowale played on about a third, a little, maybe 40% of the pass snaps, and pretty much never carried the football, but he was out there on almost pretty much every third down, any hurry up, 2-minute offense type of situation. And I think that's what you're going to see Bernard do, because we know that Tom Brady wants that kind of receiving back out there, especially in this offense where they're sending everyone else deep. They only really have one outlet guy per drop back for Brady. And I think Leonard Fournette was a guy that he dumped down to a ton last year, but Leonard Fournette's not in ideal pass game back. He was just kind of playing that role because he was better at it than Jones. So yeah, I think Bernard is really interesting. And the only thing that will hold him back is probably that schedule, because Tampa Bay has a pretty soft schedule. So that is the one issue, but I think he'll still be out there for at least, 35-40% of the pass snaps. So it should be decent, some decent weeks for Gio. I'm going to go a little bit off the map here and go with Boston Scott. He's being drafted around running back 69, but when you look at all the reports out of Eagles camp, I mean, they're talking about this guy may actually have a pretty even split with Miles Sanders, and there's just been a lot of struggles with Sanders in terms of catching the football, drops, just not really doing well in the passing game. He's drawn the ear of his coaches. So Scott is a guy that, he kind of sets up as the passing down back by default. But the reason I like him is because he has other outs. Like he could actually, he has like an outside shot to be the number one back for Philadelphia. Remember, it's a new coaching regime. So Miles Sanders, as well as he, as good of a moments as he's had at times over these past couple of years, this is the whole new coaching staff. So I like taking Boston Scott for free, given the reports out of Eagles camp. So that's the PPR guy I'm going for. But he's also pretty deep. But Samantha, who else you got when we talk about straight up deep sleepers, guys that people just aren't really thinking about, probably outside the top 50 that could return startable value this year?
Yeah, there's a bunch of guys in this range. As it stands right now, I kind of like Javian Hawkins at RB 79. Mike Davis is the lead guy in Atlanta, but there's certainly room for Hawkins to step up into a more fantasy relevant role this year. Davis finished as RB 12 and half PPR last year when he stepped up when CMC was out, which is an absolutely phenomenal finish, but he did struggle down the stretch, which made some, including myself, kind of question his durability as a full-time feature back. I personally think, I talked about the Falcons a little bit, that I think that they will be leaning much more on the pass just given their game scripts, but there is a path for Hawkins to pay off at his paltry ADP, especially if Davis misses time. I mean, in this range, you're kind of thinking about handcuffs and stuff. And on that note, I like Darren Town Evans at RB 62 and Chuba Hubbard at RB 63 as just kind of high valued handcuffs for guys that are going, top 3.
Yeah, nobody's talking about Hubbard. I mean, this guy, he's behind McCaffrey here, and we saw Mike Davis come into a ton of value last year for that same reason. So I like that call a lot. Sean, who you got?
So I think a deep sleeper I like, especially after this first round of preseason games, is Larry Rountree on the Chargers. He has a way to go to fancy relevance, but he has a path. I mean, Justin Jackson might not even make the team. There's reports that, he's on the roster bubble. And then Joshua Kelly, he doesn't really have a stranglehold on the number 2 job. So Larry Rountree could fit that role, that early down role, possibly goal line back, that Austin Eckler leaves the door open for that kind of role. So he has room for fantasy value if he becomes the number 2 back. And, I don't like overreacting to small sample size, but we got to see him play against the Rams this weekend. Yes, it was against backups, but he looked really good. 8 rushes for 63 yards. I think that, he has a way to go, but he could become the number 2 back sooner than later. And then the other 2 I like are both Dolphins backups, Malcolm Brown and Salvin Ahmed. Raybon, I know you consider Myles Gaskin a frozen pond to your running back. I agree. I think that this Dolphins coaching staff, they prove that they're more than okay benching players when they struggle, like we saw with Tua last year. So I don't think we can assume Gaskin's going to be the workhorse for all 17 games, even if he's healthy. And we even saw Malcolm Brown started the preseason game, and Myles Gaskin played the second quarter with the backups. That's not a good sign. So I think investing in either one of these backups, I think, is the way to go, because this is going to be a volatile situation. And this is going to be a good team that we kind of want shares of these running backs. So I think both are going like RB 65 range. So I'm taking flyers on both these guys because this is going to be a very volatile backfill. And that's where you kind of get fancy gold.
Yeah, I really like the Malcolm Brown call, because he's another guy that you may get for free that may end up leading his backfield in snaps, because he did start the preseason game And we saw this even with Malcolm Brown with Sean McVay, where we thought it was going to be that, Darrell Henderson, Cam Akers backfield, and Malcolm Brown was factoring in a lot more than anyone had considered even last year. So coaches seem to love this guy. I mean, he's a very solid pass protector, good, decent in the pass game, good in short yardage, not really going to lose you yards. So he could definitely be the kind of dark horse number one running back in Miami. Myles Gaskin, remember, he was a day 3 pick who was pushed into action because of other guys being injured. So it's not necessarily that Brian Flores is down on him or anything, but I don't think they ever maybe envisioned Gaskin to have a truly featured role. So I think it is worth taking a shot on Brown, and I like Ahmed too, but I do think, Brown is going to play ahead of him. So I like Brown a lot. And another guy in that same vein, it's not sexy at all, but Phillip Lindsay. I think Phillip Lindsay is going to lead the Houston Texans in carries this year. If you follow, what they're doing in camp, all the reports have been that David Johnson's rushing role is going to be greatly reduced. He's going to be used for his pass catching ability. So essentially Johnson's going to be the third down back. Lindsay, we know he's always struggled in the pass game. So it's not totally ideal for PPR, but you're probably getting a guy who gets double-digit touches and leads his backfield in touches each and every week. And that's going to be Phillip Lindsay. So I like him as, at RB51. I think he does give you enough startable weeks to make it worth it there. And, his competition is a washed David Johnson and a washed Mark Ingram and a washed Rex Burkhead. So there's a chance that Lindsay gets even more of a stranglehold of the backfield, especially in like the few games that Houston actually ends up winning. Cause I don't think they'll go 0-17. So do like Lindsay there. Another guy starter you can probably get not for free, but almost for free outside that top 50. Let's move on to wide receivers, where I think sleepers are probably the most important at this position. So we'll spend some time here. Samantha, I'll start with you. Who's a guy a little earlier in that, 30 to 50 range, maybe that wide receiver 3 or 4 range that you think has some sleeper appeal?
Yeah, I might be cheating since this guy is right outside, but I'm going to start with Robbie Anderson at wide receiver 31. So DJ Moore, who's currently going as wide receiver 18, is going to be the wide receiver 1 in this Panthers offense, but really don't count Anderson out completely. And I do like him at this ADP. He finished with 95 catches with over 1,000 yards and 3 touchdowns last year. Good enough to finish as wide receiver 17 through 16 weeks. That's he's also got pretty much equivalent competition for targets on the depth chart now that Curtis Samuel is gone, but they drafted Terrence Marshall. That said, also Anderson has a good rapport and pre-existing relationship with Sam Darnold, the Panthers' new quarterback, from their time together under Adam Gase. Their chemistry and Anderson's upside, I think, makes him worth the risk at the 31st receiver off the board. And then another guy that I like sort of in that 30 to 50 range is Michael Gallup. He has a lot of competition for targets on the Cowboys depth chart from CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper and even Blake Jarwin and Ezekiel Elliott, but he's like frequently the afterthought because he's just not like the sexy name like CeeDee Lamb, but he's a guy that I've ended up with a lot of shares of because he is the cheapest receiver on a high-powered offense with Dak Prescott back. He's just like one season removed from an 1,100 receiving yard year in 2019. Obviously, I don't expect that kind of production barring, like a major injury to Cooper or Lamb, which, I'm not ruling entirely out, of course, because like Cooper's ankle injury, which kept him on the PUP for a lot of training camp, is something that I think is worth monitoring. But even like with a fully healthy depth chart, I think that Gallup is worth the risk at his ADP of wide receiver 47.
Yeah, if you like Dak Prescott and you like this Cowboy offense, I think it's only natural to kind of trend toward Gallup for a discount, especially if you're loading up on Lamb and Cooper early, because you kind of want that, arbitrage opportunity in your portfolio. And remember, Michael Gallup could very well lead the team in air yards because that's his forte. He's the deepest receiver. He's going to run the deepest routes with, Lamb and Cooper also on the field. They're more intermediate. Gallup can go deep. So if the targets kind of get a little mixed up in a given week, Gallup's going to have some big weeks, and you're not going to be able to prioritize him in coverage. So I think that's a really good call. Sean, how about you? Guy in the wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 range that people are sleeping on.
Yeah, I'm doubling down on Michael Gallup here. He's a guy I love getting late in drafts now. I've been touting CeeDee Lamb all offseason. I think he's, probably worth his ADP even at wide receiver 10, but he's really hard to get. I mean, the draft has to go a perfect way to land him right now. So Gallup's a guy that it's so easy to get, in the mid to later rounds. At wide receiver 45, I think is his latest ADP, but he's the cheapest way to invest in this Cowboys passing offense. He was sort of the forgotten man last year, but they've been in camp, they've been moving around the formation, lining him up in the slot. So I think he's going to see less of those low percentage routes, and he could be kind of inheriting sort of the CeeDee Lamb role we saw last year. So I think he's going to have a higher floor than people realize. I think he'll be a wide receiver 3 this year. But if, Cooper or Lamb were to go down, he has wide receiver 2 upside. So I just love getting him later in the draft. You're going to be stashing on your bench to start the season, but I think by the end of the year, you'll be plugging him in as a wide receiver 3. This offense is too good to pass him up later in the draft. And then I can't get away with not mentioning Mike Williams yet again in these wide receiver sleeper sections. I love him at wide receiver 45. I think he's due for a breakout season this year. Almost every draft, if I can get him, I take him. Same thing as Michael Gallup. You're going to start him off on your bench, but by the end of the year, I think he's going to be a wide receiver 2-3 kind of value.
Yeah, it's those air yards. Both of these guys have potential to get a good amount of air yards in what should be a good offense, should be high volume pass offenses. So I do like those calls. I'm going to go with a guy who's been slipping. And that's Corey Davis. He's actually at wide receiver 51 over the last week in FanBall best ball drafts. So I think that's way too low for Davis. I get the uncertainty with the rookie quarterback and whatnot, but when I'm looking for guys in this range, I'm looking for straight up upside, and kind of like what you guys talked about with with Gallup and Williams. Corey Davis has a chance to lead his team in air yards, and he actually has a pretty good chance because Jamison Crowder, he'll get targets, but they're going to come closer to the line of scrimmage. And then you have Elijah Moore, who is starting to play outside, but still, and another guy I really like, but he's been banged up, missing some time in camp, and he's another guy that played predominantly inside, so we don't necessarily expect him to have a lot, a deep air yard profile in his rookie year either. At tight end, I mean, Chris Herndon is still MIA. They might even start Tyler Kroft, who would probably pass block on a lot of pass snaps anyway. So there's just a lot of opportunity for an alpha guy to emerge there. And Corey Davis, remember that one year with the Titans when he was just the lead guy, and his target share and air yard share was in the upper 20s, and I think that's what you can kind of see here with the Jets. So I just love kind of targeting these guys that they could get the air yard. That's kind of how you skip kind of jump value here, because all these guys are so close together in that wide receiver 30 to like 40, 45 range. Everyone will kind of split hairs and say you should take this guy over that guy or this other guy. But the bottom line is they all project within 1 or 2 points of each other. So the guys that are going to have the most upside are the guys that can just get a lot of yards and targets at once, a lot of yards at once. And that's air yard guys. So I think Corey Davis can be that guy for the Jets. So like him at wide receiver number 51. We're going to spend a lot of time on wide receivers. And so we're going to actually go year by year here for a second. We're going to start with rookies, and we're going to talk about, year 2 guys, because those are the classic breakout candidates these days. So Samantha, starting with rookies, who do you think people are sleeping on in this 2021 draft class?
Yeah, outside of the major names, I'm going to give you 2. So I'm going to start with Rondell Moore at wide receiver 70. So he's at least 4 deep on the Cardinals depth chart behind Hopkins, Green, Christian Kirk. But the Cardinals do run the most four wide receiver sets in the NFL, which I think could certainly open up some opportunities for the rookie wideout. Also worth mentioning that Green's not the most durable. I think he's 32 at this point. And I could definitely see more moving around on that depth chart as the season progresses. At his current ADP of wide receiver 71 and half PPR, he's a guy I'm willing to take a late round risk on. And then another guy that I like in the rookie class is Amon-Ra St. Brown at wide receiver 76. Wide receiver depth chart for the Lions is in shambles with the departure of Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones this offseason. Brown is one of the only rookies that I think has a really clear path to becoming a team's wide receiver one this season. Now, yes, being a wide receiver one on a Jared Goff-led Lions offense isn't exactly the sexiest. And, but all he has in terms of competition is Tyrell Williams and Brashad Perriman from the wide receiver corps. So another guy that I'm definitely willing to take a risk on in deep leagues at wide receiver 76.
Yeah, I'll talk more about St. Brown, so I'm not even going to get into it, but I just love that one. Sean, who you got as far as rookies you're expecting to provide some value?
I laid out my wide receiver tiers last week. That Terrence Marshall is the late round rookie receiver I'm targeting, and then he blew up in this first preseason game, so I'm worried his ADP might shoot up a bit, but I still think he's worth it. He's played in offensive coordinator Joe Brady's offense before back at LSU. So he's familiar with the scheme. I think he'll fit in right away. And he's a monster. He's 6'3", 205 pounds. DJ Moore or Robbie Anderson really haven't profiled as red zone, targets. So I think that, I wouldn't be surprised if Terrence Marshall leads the team in receiving touchdowns this year. He could start off, either splitting time or behind David Moore to begin the season as the team's wide receiver 3, but similar to Justin Jefferson last year, it's only a matter of time before he takes over permanently. And this offense, they lost the number 3 receiver last year in Curtis Samuel. So there are targets to go around. So I think Terrence Marshall is a great, late round stash to put on your bench. You're not going to be starting in week 1, but, by mid-season, he could have like a mini Justin Jefferson type breakout. So I love taking him later in drafts.
Yeah, I would be really surprised if Moore was the number 3 wideout over Marshall, even to start the year, just because I think Marshall's a better fit in that he can take over a lot of those slot snaps that Curtis Samuel played last year. I think that was kind of the optimal alignment when they had Anderson and Moore on the outside. And I think Marshall allows them to continue to do that. Whereas Moore, he's almost like like the old version of Robbie Anderson, where you just run a lot of deep routes and not really do much. And, kind of just don't even notice him on the field. So just like a poor man's Anderson. I don't know if that's a good fit. I think he should be more of I would think he would be more of a direct backup to Anderson than a guy that's really a threat to Marshall. So I think Marshall starts the year with a pretty strong role, but I want to go back to St. Brown because I really love him on this Detroit team, because I don't even think he needs an injury to Williams or Perriman or anything like that. Like he's going to be the starting slot receiver on a team that really has no one else in the slot. He's a guy that I think could start to move outside because he's the best route runner on the team already. We're, hearing that all throughout camp. That's what he was known for in school. He's been the guy that's been getting open. Goff loves to throw underneath. So the same reasons we like TJ Hawkinson to have a blow up year, St. Brown is just like the cheap wide receiver version of that, where Perriman, Williams, these guys could run 100% of the routes, and still be targeted like 12 to 15% of the time, because they run a lot of deep routes. They're not necessarily creating a lot of separation, and they're going to have to create a lot of separation for Goff to trust his arm, to trust himself to get that ball to them, especially in a new offense. He doesn't really have chemistry with these guys. I think St. Brown ends the year as the most targeted Lions receiver, and I think he can be the most targeted Lions receiver in week 1. So again, just a guy with a lot of upside in terms of being a target hog right off the bat. And then more of a deep guy, but a guy that I think is starting to get some value as things shape up in Houston is Nico Collins. Let's not forget, the team kind of made some moves to go get him. And then he's in a situation where he's competing with Chris Conley for an outside receiver spot. You're talking about a day 2 pick competing with a guy in Conley who's never really been a guy to, hold down a big role in an offense over an extended period. And then beyond that, I mean, you traded your slot receiver, Randall Cobb, who could have kind of taken targets away. Now you have Kiki Kuti in there, and Collins likely is the starter on the outside with Cooks and then QT in the slot. We don't know exactly what they're going to do at tight end. This is a new regime. They could play Jordan Akins. They could play Farrell Brown a bunch. They could use that position as more of a blocking position. We really don't know, but there's a lot of targets and air yards up for grabs in Houston. And the one thing about Collins is I like taking him as like a cheaper Brandon Cooks, because Cooks is going in the 30s in terms of wide receivers and Collins is going in the 90s. And well, I think Cooks has that same kind of upside where he's just could be the team leader and get like a monster target share just because he's the only guy. Defenses are going to be scheming on him. I don't think he's he's not a big body guy. So he's not a guy that can truly like beat press coverage on a consistent basis or anything like that, beat double teams. So I think that Collins is going to be the guy to benefit and defenses are going to make him beat him. So like me some Nico Collins in year 1, a guy you can pretty much get for free. But let's talk about year 2, because it used to be year 3. And you still see occasionally some guys break out in year 3, but because the NFL is a passing league now, because teams are passing almost 2/3 of the time these days, wide receivers are getting so many more reps in year 1. And by year 2, a lot of them are taking big jumps. Remember DJ Chark even a couple years ago, kind of out of nowhere. So in that similar vein, Samantha, who are some guys you see kind of taking that big leap in year 2 this year?
Yeah, so Leviska Chanel at wide receiver 42. He's a guy that I was definitely pumping up a lot last year, which obviously didn't necessarily pan out. He finished as wide receiver 53 through 16 weeks, averaging 8.2 fantasy points and half PPR. But I don't think that that's a really fair representation. I'm not super convinced it was in the Jaguars' best interest to win games last year. They had a rotating cast of Gardner Minshew, Mike Glennon, Jake Luton under center. Trevor Lawrence is going to be a palpable upgrade above all of them for Chanel. He's got a lot of competition for targets, for sure, from DJ Chark, Marvin Jones, and Travis Etienne. But I could definitely see Chanel breaking out above Chark and Jones, especially with some of their durability issues. And then another guy that I like as a year 2 breakout candidate is Darnell Moody at wide receiver 51. He's definitely a popular sleeper this year, and he's probably one of my favorites. He was subjected to what we can generously refer to as subpar QB play in Chicago last season. But what we did see of him was super encouraging. He was able to stretch the field. He got 61 passes for 631 yards and 4 touchdowns in a very anemic Bears offense. Andy Dalton's going to be an upgrade from Foles and Trubisky for the passing game. And once they do switch to Fields, I could definitely see Moody having a real breakout season.
Yeah, I like Darnell Moody a lot. I think with a different quarterback, there's a lot of upside for him. He was a guy that was, by the end of the year, he was on the field for 90% of the snaps, and he was that team's true number 2 target, and over guys like Jimmy Graham and Cole Kmet, and obviously Anthony Miller. So I think Moody continues to build on that. And there's just, when you look at year 2, there are just percentage increases. It's generally in the 15-20% range in terms of per game numbers from year 1 to year 2 on average for wide receivers. So that would be a nice little jump for Mooney here. Sean, how about you? Who are you looking at to break out in year 2 at wide receiver?
I think Jerry Jeudy at ADP wide receiver 35 right now. He sticks out like a sore thumb. I mean, he's inside my top 30 now. I keep moving him up, but he ranked 7th in air yards last year as a rookie. He's a skilled route runner. And he had 3 things go against him his rookie season, which I think led to the disappointing season. But number 1, he had 13 drops. Those were his fault. I'm not, saying he wasn't to blame for those, but that isn't really a sticky stat year to year. So I think he's going to clean up the drops. And those are going to convert into catches this year. And then number 2, he dealt with horrible QB play. I mean, he had 65.5 catchable ball rate last year. That ranked 37th out of 38 wide receivers that saw 100 plus targets. He's going to get improved quarterback play from Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater this year. I'm almost certain about that. And then number 3, he just had lousy touchdown luck. He was 0 for 7 on end zone targets last year. So I think he's due for some pretty massive positive touchdown regression. All those 3 things can get combined. I think he's going to put together a huge year. And he's, a no-brainer year 2 leap, in my opinion. And then the other guy would be Gabe Davis. We saw him step up last year when John Brown was out. But the Bills run a ton of 4 wide receiver formations. They ran the second most last year. So even if all 4 receivers are healthy, Gabe Davis should see playing time. And then he's 1 injury away from one of these 3 receivers from putting up, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 potential. So similar to Michael Gallup, I love investing in the cheapest option in a lethal passing attack, and that's Gabe Davis for the Bills. So he's another year 2 player that I think can make a huge leap this year as well.
I love Gabriel Davis. I think that there's a very decent shot that he just takes that John Brown role and it's not actually Emmanuel Sanders, because if you watched when John Brown was hurt last year, Gabriel Davis would run 100% of the routes. He would be out there on every single snap. He would not come out of the game. And he was the guy that they put into that role. And now you have Sanders here, but he's on the wrong side of 30. You also have Beasley on the wrong side of 30. Those guys are both underneath targets. I think Davis, because you're on most plays, you're going to want a guy to go down the field and take the pressure off Diggs in that, intermediate area. So I think Davis has a chance to, be a 90% snap player from week 1. And Sanders may be the guy that's in that, 50 to 60 to 70 range, kind of keep him fresh for the stretch run. Because this is another team that has their sight set deep into the postseason. So I think Gabriel Davis is a great year 2 lead candidate. He's a great best ball pick too, because the one thing about him is you may not be able to predict the weeks he goes off, but his average depth of target is 17. He was top 3 on the team in red zone targets. So he's got a lot of ways to score fantasy points, and he should be on the field a ton. So I really like him. Marcus Callaway for the Saints, coming into year 2, really impressive last year in limited action. Now he's been playing so well that in the second half of the Saints game, he was in street clothes already. Like, he was just treated like a veteran, because that's how valuable he is at that wide receiver now with Michael Thomas on the shelf. Trequan Smith has been banged up, but I think Callaway has a chance to be a air yard hog in the first half of the year, especially, but even down the stretch, because he's competing with Adam Troutman at tight end. He's not going to get air yards. Alvin Kamara will get a huge target share, but pretty much no air yards come out of that. They're just running back targets. Trequan Smith, he's always been a guy that has not really drawn a lot of targets per route run on the field. So there's a wide opening for somebody to emerge and be a real big air yard guy, especially over the first half of the year when Thomas is, still iffy. So I like Callaway a lot. Wide receiver 70. I think he'll have value early in the year, and you can drop him or whatever if things don't go right. But I have a hunch that he might stay on your roster all year. And then Henry Ruggs, a guy I was high on last year. I was dead wrong on him. Really struggled in year 1, but Derek Carr, we've seen him improve within this Gruden offense. Henry Ruggs, no COVID again. Another guy I think will benefit from an off season, benefit from a year of being able to watch his tape. We saw Carr actually start to go down the field last year. It's just Nelson Aguilar ended up being the beneficiary. He's out of the picture now. There's a lot of hype around Bryan Edwards, but Bryan Edwards is a guy that's going to be tethered to the line of scrimmage. He's going to be a year 2 player playing his first real snaps. I think he's going to struggle to draw a high target rate, but I think Henry Ruggs is a guy that will move around, a guy that has speed, a guy that can use that speed at different levels and will be scheming the ball even more so. I think he really sets up for that huge upside type of league year that, some people like me included thought may even happen last year. So really like Henry Ruggs still going outside the top 50. Let's close the wide receiver segment with straight up deep sleepers. Doesn't have to be a rookie, doesn't have to be a year 2 guy, but just somebody that maybe it's a best ball dart throw or another guy in a bad team who you're just looking at to vastly outplay his value. Samantha?
Yeah, I really liked Marquez Callaway, he just mentioned in the last section. I assumed you meant deep sleepers like guys outside the top 50. So Russell Gage is kind of on the high end of that. I think he could see an increased role with Julio Jones off to Tennessee in the Atlanta offense, which I suspect will be throwing a lot. I don't expect consistent week to week production without a major injury to Calvin Ridley, but I think he's an interesting best ball target and got a target in deeper leagues as a bench stash. He finished as wide receiver 41 last year through 16 weeks, and he's currently being drafted as wide receiver 60 in half PPR. And then another guy that's definitely not a sexy name is John Brown at wide receiver 66. He's getting up there in age, but yeah, there's no clear wide receiver one in this Las Vegas offense. I know you mentioned Henry Ruggs, definitely has the opportunity to take that over. But we've seen Brown be productive as recently as 2019, where he had a 1,000-yard season, finished as wide receiver 15 in half PPR. He does carry injury risk, but at his ADP of, wide receiver 68, I could definitely see him returning on investment, especially in best ball formats.
I mean, I'll say this, I'm not high on Brown, but if you would have told me last year that Nelson Aguilar would have been the most valuable Raider receiver and had the season he had, I would have thought you were crazy. So it's kind of the same thing with Brown, right? Like a veteran signing, no one knows what to expect. He could emerge. I think it would have to be in place of a guy like Edwards, though. I think Ruggs will be, just because of the draft pedigree, I think he'll get the most snaps. But I think there's still some opportunity there in Vegas for another guy to emerge like Aguilar did last year. So that'll be really interesting. Sean, how about you? Deep sleepers that wide out?
So I think a best ball draft, specifically deep sleeper guy, is Marquez Valdes-Scantling. I put together best ball scores, which only takes useful scores for best ball. That's all you should care about. Straight up upside, baby. And no one's better than Marquez Valdes-Scantling. He finished number 31 at wide receiver last year in my best ball scores. And it makes sense. I mean, he's the main deep threat in this offense. Yes, Randall Cobb, Devin Funchess, Amari Rogers could eat into the snaps for Valdes-Scantling this year, but still, he's the main deep threat. And I think, he's going to be a great best ball guy. You can get him super cheap, but he's way more value in a best ball. I wouldn't start him in a traditional, head-to-head season-long league. So he's a best ball only kind of guy. And then you guys already mentioned him earlier, but Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's the best Lions receiver, I think, to invest in this year. He's the kind of guy that Jared Goff loves the target. Tyrod Williams, Rashad Perryman kind of profile is more deep threat kind of guys. He doesn't like targeting those kind of wide receivers. So St. Brown's going to line up in the slot. He could be his new Cooper Kupp. So he's the guy that I'm willing to invest in. The Lions are going to be terrible. They're going to have plenty of negative game scripts. So I think St. Brown is a really sneaky pick in PPR formats.
So I think that makes all three of us that name St. Brown in like a different segment far. But I think the Cooper Kupp comparison is very keen, because that's one that I thought of as well, because I'm trying to look at okay, what's a realistic expectation for a guy that, didn't go on, the first 2 days of the draft and is kind of coming into the league, but on a team that really needs him. And I said, oh, wait, there's kind of a precedent for this, because he had Jared Goff, coming to a new coaching staff, coming off a bad year, pretty much a whole new team with that Rams team, that first McVay year. And it was Cooper Kupp to come out of nowhere. And I think that was because of the type of routes he run and the type of player he is. And I think St. Brown can offer some similarities there in terms of a guy that can do a lot of work inside over the middle, runs crisp routes, can become a quarterback's best friend. So, he's a guy, I mean, we're all talking him up, so he'll probably bust. We probably jinxed him, but I really do.
Yeah, but he won't kill you if you try. It's not going to lose your season. So
exactly. And that's what's important about these guys. It's, the reason they're sleepers is because there's little risk to them. People are sleeping on them. There's not really, it's not like Saquon Barkley, where he could finish as the RB1, or he could play 5 games or something like that. There's no risk with a lot of these guys and where you're drafting them. You should probably have your starting lineup set by the time you're drafting most of these guys. So you just got to take shots on upside here, and you're not going to hit everyone, but you hit a good amount of them, and you're going to have a massive edge. Sometimes all it takes is one player more than the second, third, fourth best team in your fantasy league, and that's enough. So Hope some of these guys are valuable to the listeners out there. We'll close it up with the tight end position. And Samantha, let's start with guys going outside the top 10. It's a pretty volatile position. So I'm just going to say the top 10 because ADP kind of fluctuates almost daily, I feel like, and it depends on what site you're at. So after you get from like Logan Thomas and Fant and Goddard, it just, there's a huge, just like, it's just a toss up. So who do you like outside the top 10 as a sleeper at tight end?
Yeah, Jonnu Smith was a guy that I was pumping up for sure, but he's got an ankle injury. Hunter Henry's also hurt, so I'm not even going to go down that path. Adam Troutman, who's a guy that I talked up last week in our tight ends podcast. He's tight end 17 on Fantasy Pros. I think he could definitely find himself inside the tight end 1 tier now that Michael Thomas is going to miss significant time recovering from an ankle injury. Trequan Smith is the obvious beneficiary in Marquez Callaway from the Thomas injury, but so is Troutman, especially with Jared Cook gone. There's going to be less appeal for Troutman if we see Hill starting more games, but with Winston favored to be the week 1 starter, I think that's good news for all the New Orleans pass catchers. So I really like Troutman to finish as a tight end 1.
Adam Troutman. I mean, he's like polarizing to me because I actually think he's still a year away. I just don't see the Saints, regardless of Winston or Taysom Hill, operating a high volume pass offense this year. I think, and that's why I'm kind of leaning toward Callaway as a sleeper, because I think he gets the air yards. Trequan could obviously get them too. I just think Callaway is a better player at this point, but we'll see how that shakes out with Troutman. I think this time next year is when he's really gonna be undervalued. This year I'm kind of torn on him because I just don't know if the opportunity will be there in how I think the Saints are going to play.
Even if he's a year away, he's going to play a lot because they don't really have anybody else. So
yeah, I mean that's the thing. They got like Nick Vannett, behind him, is more of a blocking guy, so he'll be on the field. I'm not sure he'll totally break out this year. But Sean, who you got as a deep sleeper? I mean, a regular sleeper at tight end.
I'm sticking with Irv Smith as my guy outside of the top 12 that I think will be a tight end 1. He's due for year 3 breakout anyway, but with Kyle Rudolph out of the picture, we already saw last year in the 4 games without Rudolph, he was a top 5 tight end. The Vikings really operate a 2 wide receiver offense. So Irv Smith is technically the wide receiver 3 in this offense. And, I'm predicting Adam Thielen to see some, touchdown regression this year after scoring a career high 14 touchdowns. I think Irv Smith will benefit from that. I think he'll be he has sneaky touchdown upside, but also I think he has the target share locked in as essentially the number 3 receiver in this offense. So I love getting Irv Smith outside of the top 12 this year.
Yeah, he's the guy that I think with tight ends, you see it a little more still in year 3. And that's another reason I say, a guy like Troutman, Cole Kmet, popular sleepers are still, I think, a year away. But I think this is the year where Irv Smith does make a pretty big jump. And you hit the nail on the head. He is that 3rd receiver for them. They will not really play a true number 3 receiver, even have to snap some games. So that really does benefit Smith, who is coming along as a route runner, improving year over year. So I like him a lot. I'm going to go with some interesting I'm going to go with another interesting name because I think it's just at this point in the tight end, when I'm looking at tight ends, I'm looking for guys that I can see get high volume. And there's really a couple of guys that everyone's really, really down on based on what happened last year, that because tight end is so ugly and it's just such a toss up, I'm starting to target these guys a little more than I thought I would. And I'll save one for the deep sleepers, but for this segment, I'll go with Evan Ingram. He's going around tight end 17. And remember, this is a guy that was being drafted as a top 5 or 6 tight end over the years, even with Saquon Barkley there on the team. And now, he has a bad year, ton of drops, obviously his fault, just like Jerry Jeudy, but still a guy who didn't run, lower than 77% of the routes for, at tight end last year for this team. Kyle Rudolph, we don't know when he's coming back. He hasn't really been able to practice at all. He's been on the shelf. They just lost Levine Toilolo, so they might not be able to go with, a lot of as many subs for Ingram as they want to. I think he'll still run a ton of routes. And I actually think, the return of Barkley and the signing of Galladay, it helps a guy like Evan Ingram because now he's not the focus of the defense as much. It's similar to kind of Sterling Shepard, I think, when he's on the field. Like, those guys are a lot better when they can operate is not the true focus of the defense. So we've seen Evan Ingram do it before. We're taking there's a lot of guys that are just kind of a toss-up in this range. So I'm going with the upside of Ingram, who I think can bounce back and have a decent season. And he just runs a ton of routes, and that's hard to replace at tight end because you see a lot of regression to the mean year over year. These, it's like in terms of their targets per route, in terms of their touchdown, catches per reception. So Evan Ingram, when all's said and done, he projects out as still a borderline top 12 option for me. So I'm going with Ingram as my immediate sleeper at tight end. But let's finish it up with the deep sleepers. Samantha, who's a tight end you like outside the top 20?
Yeah, I'll give you guys two outside the top 20. So my first one is going to be Dawson Knox. So Sean, to your point, I think this is when you spoke about Gabriel Davis, it's a cheap way to invest in a high-powered offense. And, to even your point, Chris, if you believe in the year 3 breakout, it could definitely happen for Knox, barring a major trade. I know there was talk earlier this offseason of Zach Ertz going there, but he is, a number 1 tight end in this Buffalo offense. He's going to compete sort of with Jacob Hollister on the depth chart, but I'd certainly like him to finish higher than his ADP, which is tight end 36 on Fantasy Pros and half PPR. And then another guy that I like in that deep tier is OJ Howard at tight end 29. So actually, I think I had both of these guys on my Scottish team last year. A little disappointing, but yeah, Howard's a bit of an afterthought. He suffered that, season-ending Achilles tear in week 4, but what we did see of him and his connection with Tom Brady was very encouraging. He's a former first-round pick, and he outproduced Gronk while he was healthy. Gronk's getting up there in age, certainly wear and tear issues. So there's a clear path to Howard kind of having that breakout year, finally stepping up into a larger role if he can stay on the field. He's getting drafted as tight end 28, aka undrafted in most leagues. So he's more of a guy that I think just worth keeping an eye on waivers.
Yeah, I think the value is definitely there with Howard over a guy like Gronk, who I just don't know how many snaps he'll play on a weekly basis, which is going to make him really tough to predict. Remember last year he benefited from, Howard going down. Now with Howard back, I think they can rest Gronk a lot more than they did last year and kind of save him for the stretch run. So Howard would be, one of many guys to benefit. There's a lot of mouths to feed in Tampa Bay, but you also got Tom Brady playing out of his mind. So it's a good place to kind of invest in an offense. Sean, how about you? Who do you like as a deep sleeper or deep sleepers at tight end?
I like Hayden Hurst at tight end 27. Now, obviously, the Falcons drafting Kyle Pitts was a massive blow to his value. However, he's still a first-round talent. He's 28 years old. He knows the offense. I mean, with Julio Jones out of the picture and Arthur Smith taking over, we could see more 2 tight end formation. So Hurst might see playing time alongside Kyle Pitts. They might line Kyle Pitts up in the slot. Either way, I think, Hayden Hurst will still get some playing time. So he could provide, some value week to week and, deeper tight end premium type formats. And if for whatever reason, if Kyle Pitts struggles, which I don't see happening, or misses time, which could happen, Hayden Hurst has already shown that he's a tight end 1/tight end 2 kind of player. So I think that, just getting him this cheap kind of reminds me of getting Dallas Goedert for the past couple seasons as sort of like a upside bench stash. But either way, Hayden Hurst at tight end 27, I think he's way undervalued there for a bunch of different reasons, but love getting him there.
Yeah, he's interesting because I think people just immediately writing him off because of Kyle Pitts. But remember, Kyle Pitts can play a lot of receivers, and Hayden Hurst is probably one of the Falcons' optimal lineup probably contains Hayden Hurst on the field a bunch of snaps just because they are a little thin at that, last receiver spot after Russell Gage. So at that third receiver spot. So I think that's an interesting one, especially for a team that, like Samantha, you said, this might be a team that has a lot of passing game scripts this year. So I think Hurst is interesting. I'm going with a guy, again, this guy has done it before, and we're just way down on him after last season. There's a lot of uncertainty around him, but he's going as the tight end 25 over the past week in fan ball, and that's Zach Ertz. And I just think, like, at this point, you have to buy him, because if he's traded, he's probably going to be traded to a situation where he's still the starting tight end. If he remains on the Eagles, I think there's still a very good chance that he is on the field even more than Dallas Goedert. So last year he did struggle, but Carson Wentz also struggled a ton. Tight ends don't necessarily fall off a cliff in terms of aging the way like some big body wide receivers do as they get up there in age. So I think we're just kind of looking at Zach Ertz like, oh, he's washed now, but I think Carson Wentz had a lot to do with it. There's a new coaching regime. Ertz is reportedly looked like the old Zach Ertz in camp. And I just think there's a lot of upside getting a guy that, you know, just a year ago, we were taking as a consensus top 5 tight end at tight end 25. Again, this is a position that's tough to predict. It's tough to find value. Everyone's kind of projects close together. So I'm buying low on a guy like this who we've seen do it year in, year out. And even last year, just, you know, the targets were still decent. It's just, you know, the catch rate was abysmal. The drops, you know, had some Wentz issues, some uncatchable balls. So just a lot went wrong last year for that whole Eagles offense. But like Zach Ertz at tight end number 25. All right. That was a good episode, guys. That will do it for us. Thanks everyone for listening to us every season. And again, we've got this new feed, the Fantasy Flex. So please write a review for the pod. Please subscribe. It helps us a ton. And Samantha, tell everybody what you're up to and where they can find you.
Sure. Yeah. You can find me on Twitter, mostly at Samantha NFL. I'm also on TikTok and Instagram at Spravidi. And then I'm working on lots of, you know, different things, kind of updates during the preseason. Right now I'm kind of working on like a worryometer for the rookies. A number of rookies are having some tough preseasons. And yeah, just like working on the roundtables and stuff with you guys, ramping up for the season and just getting super stoked for my first NFL season.
Oh yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Always bring great insights. And you guys can find Sean on Twitter at @the_oddsmaker and me on Twitter at Chris Raybon. Be sure to check out actionnetwork.com for all of our fantasy content, those roundtables that Samantha mentioned, and our fantasy draft tool where you could load up Sean and my projections into your league settings and get your custom cheat sheets and all that good stuff. Also, be sure to download the award-winning Action Network app. Until next time, let's get this shmoney.